Hello, Sangha. Welcome to the Abbots address for today. It's April 17th. There was a question that came in. A few people have voiced questions kind of around this topic. I'll try to paraphrase them and address it a little bit. Basically, when people look into Chogyam Trungpa, whose book we've been holding up, and learn a little bit about some of the dark side of this fellow, the question comes up, what the hell? Supposed to be a great teacher of enlightenment and all this, and yet here I encounter this, underside, this dark side. So what about that? How can we consider that a valid source of input? So it's a valid question, and it's an important one. And there's no real quick answer to that, although there are a couple of things that occur right off the top. First of all, every person who is a lineage holding ancestor is a person, and every person has a shadow side. Me, to be sure, my teacher, to be sure, his teacher, to be sure, her teacher, to be sure, and all the way down the line. So it's very important to, in some ways, demythologize the reality of the Dharma transmission. I mean, in a certain way, the myth is important because it holds up the archetype, and if the archetype is in place healthfully, then it can fill its role in a person's development for the time wherein they need it. Okay, so there's a lot kind of packed into that statement, but basically what I'm saying is that holding up the archetype of the teacher is a skillful means, just like everything else in Buddhism. It's a skillful means. But the shadow side of that is that we tend to, look at these people, especially when they're historically back further. The further away they are historically, the easier it is to kind of imagine them as these grand other kind of beings and like burn a votive candle to them and keep them safely at distance. I guarantee you, every one of those people smelled when they sweat, and they all sweat, every one of them, as well as smile. See, so there's that. That's a general statement. Okay, everybody, all of us, practitioners, teachers, we're all just people. And then, the other point to say, specifically about him, is that if you look at him and the generation of teachers with him, if you scratch and sniff a little bit, you find that there's a whole host of problems with the teachers of that generation. Remember, we're talking about the 60s and the 70s. American culture was in a very turbulent place, and a lot of these teachers that were holding the Asian traditions were coming from very, very different cultures from ours. And, the result was a very highly combustible mix. Think about it. I mean, there's a certain type of personality that's going to be willing to leave their home country and put themselves here in America. And then there's a certain kind of personality at that time in our culture that's going to be wanting to study this stuff. So there's a very particular and unique set of historical conditions that are pushing and compressing these people to kind of dance with each other, okay? And the cultures are trying to figure out how to do this. And there's going to be some explosions. And I'm not saying that it's fine, but I am saying that it's kind of reasonable to expect it. How about like that? Okay, not that it's acceptable, but I understand something of it. Some things I don't understand, but it makes sense to me. The sexual aesthetics of the 60s were different from the 30s, not so different from the 20s maybe, or the 50s. The 20s, yes, the 50s, no, and so on. Drug use. You show up to the Zendo to teach, and you barely speak the language, and these Americans are acting very strangely because they're all dropping acid. It's okay. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on there. For us, for me, and I think for us here in this Sangha, in this place, in this early 21st century moment, we're in a very different moment. We have these wonderful new things called ethics policies. See, the fact is that I can actually be fired if I were to make some ethically egregious miscalculation and start doing some of the crazy stuff that Chogyam and other teachers do, I would rightfully be kicked out on my ear and censured and so on. And I think that's reasonable. And I think that not only is it reasonable, I think it's important. I think it's one of the major developments as the Dharma takes root in the West, in America, that, you know, there are certain correctives that are put in place to preclude the kind of missteps that we saw in prior generations. And in fact, you see this across the board. Excuse me, when you look at the Soto Zen Buddhist Association ethics statement or the American Zen Teacher Association, and beyond just Zen, in Buddhist sects across the spectrum, there's this, you know, awareness now. Well, we weren't really ready developmentally to tackle those questions earlier on, as obvious as they seem today. We were trying to translate language and understand what the heck, you know, was going on. So it doesn't mean that it's all okay. I'm not sweeping anything under the rug, and I'm not saying approving of any of the behaviors of any of the lineage teachers that should get censure rather than approval, obviously. But at the same time, what I am saying is that even with those very human mistakes, we can use those human mistakes as fuel for our improvement of the Dharma in the West, which I think we're doing. But let's have no illusions that the result will be that we'll make our own mistakes. And the best use of that would be that the generations that come next will experience those and do correctives for them. And as time goes on, the lineage will continue to improve and refine itself. Now, with that process, that's not a new process. That's been happening since the thing began, I would speculate. But the Dharma itself can flow through all of those misshapen containers. In fact, it has no other vessel. Every single vessel of the Dharma is a misshapen one. Me, Chogyam, you, all of us. That's not negotiable. That's the deal. That's first noble truth. Okay, and the Dharma is still the Dharma. So for me, when I encounter much of what Chogyam has to say in that book, not every word that ever fell from the man's lips, of course not, but a lot of the core things that are in that text and others of his, it's solid Dharma. It really is. No, I don't hold back from that at all. And at the same time, I'm able to look at some of the decisions he made ethically, morally, and say, not okay. See, and so for me, that's fine. I responded to one questioner about this by saying, you know, that there's plenty of, you know, Miles Davis is an example of someone who personally I would not have enjoyed spending a lot of time with. He seemed to be have a lot of personality problems and defects, eccentricisms, shall we say. But, you know, his ballads will bring a tear to your eye. So the music is the music, and that's good enough for me. You know, I take what's useful, what's nourishing, and absorb that, and take the rest to be an example of what not to do as best I can. And you'll absorb that, and then move on to make the contribution of the moment. So that's an initial kind of response, and I think that's pretty much how it sits for me. Any kind of idea that, oh, people who are teachers should be these perfected beings beyond mistake is a little naive. I think it's much more realistic to say, you know, people who teach this stuff are human beings, capable of making great mistakes. Let's have systems in place to handle that. I think that's a much healthier and more evolved view. And so that's what we do in this Sangha. So that's my response. I welcome further conversation on that. I think it's a good one. So then, in other news, you know, this Sunday is the Mountain Seat Ceremony, and so thankfully this is the last Friday video I'll talk about the Mountain Seat Ceremony. Enough with that, but I'm really looking forward to it. There's just a huge number of people that have put an immense amount of effort into organizing and planning and getting this thing ready. Myoho is just central. I mean, without her dedicated effort, navigating all kinds of craziness from myself and others, it wouldn't be happening. So special vows to her and Shoan for her help with the liturgical work. I mean, I wouldn't be able to organize this without her help. Jodan, Kyoan, the whole leadership council, you know, really just a lot of folks. Shigetsu's work on making the high seat. I mean, it just goes on and on. I'm sure I'm spacing on some people, and I apologize, but wow, it's only because I bask in the awesome that you are, and I'm blinded. Can't remember everybody, so thank you. So we'll see you Sunday. Gather at 10:30. There will be no morning activities before that. Just gather at 10:30. Don't be late. Myoho has asked that people dress kind of nice, which I think is a lovely aspiration. You know, that's up to you. No one's turned away ever, of course, but you know, it'd be kind of nice. And we'll see you there. Thank you, Sandra.